Perfect. So will you help me?
Of course, Mr. Biden. I will go house to house and kill every single villager, man, woman, or child, all for you.
Hasta luego.
A fun fact that you might not know is that the original Resident Evil 4 has more releases and ports than Skyrim. Yeah, it's arguably the most re-released video game ever made, and there's a good reason for that. I can say with absolute certainty that had it not been for the release of Resident Evil 4, 50% or more of all existing video games would look totally different than they do now. Gears of War, Uncharted, Mass Effect, and especially Dead Space, just to name a few. The concept of the over-the-shoulder perspective was more than likely inevitable, but Resident Evil 4 was the game that brought it to life, and on top of that, it is considered by many to be the best Resident Evil game, and by some, even the best PS2 or GameCube game to ever have released. All that said, it was not without its controversy. Original fans of the earlier games hated the action-oriented changes that Resident Evil 4 brought to the series, everything from the camera angles and atmosphere to the quick-time events and set pieces. This game did receive its fair share of criticisms, but it was dust in the wind compared to the love and success that found the game after its release.
No thanks, bro.
Well, here we are roughly 18 years later, and Resident Evil 4 has been resurrected with cutting-edge graphics, gameplay, updated voice acting and writing, and a stylishly redesigned coat of paint that seems to tweak only the things that needed tweaking. If you're hoping for criticism and an objective breakdown on the game, that's not about to happen. I'm about to praise this game for the duration of this video with the exception of a few criticisms near the end, but it will not be spoiler-free, so I encourage you to play it immediately. The graphics look amazing. There's nothing I can say about them other than they are utterly phenomenal. The detail is dripping, the environment is living, and I'd call it quadruple A in terms of production. Instead, I want to praise the amount of customization and versatility the game gives you to manipulate the graphics to support your rig's capabilities. You can select the texture quality, multiple different settings for shadows and lighting to optimize it to look as good as your rig can handle, and even the level of detail on the individual hair strands. I'm running this on an RTX 3080 with a 5th gen Ryzen 7, so I can push it pretty hard, but I still can't seem to max it out. I could still make it look really good, but pushing it too hard was resulting in crashes, so I had to lower some of the shadow settings in order to really maximize performance while keeping the ray tracing looking smooth and above 60 FPS. I was probably getting around 144 FPS throughout my playthrough. You can probably make it run with a solid FPS even with lower grade rig just by dropping some of these settings down, so I'd look into that if you're interested in playing this game. The RE engine is just a mystery to me because it is stunning in what it is actually capable of. Every game that has been released on this engine has run and looked like a masterclass in game design. Capcom is really sitting on the best competitor to Unreal I've seen yet, which is really good since the rest of the industry has just given up and assimilated into the Unreal master hive mind organism. This is honestly pretty much what the Callisto Protocol was trying to be in terms of that quadruple A budget they were talking about. I cannot praise the visuals of this game enough. And I don't even just mean the graphics, I mean the design, more specifically the design of our characters. Resident Evil 4 continues the franchise trend of casting supermodels as its protagonists, which, while I see people whining about it, I love. RE2 through 4 remakes now have had brilliantly attractive characters, and while I see arguments about this being unrealistic or unrelatable, I totally disagree. Not because I do look like these characters, but because I think I should. When Leon Roundhouse kicks a Ganado in style, it makes me want to get straight to the gym and train legs. Watching him backspring reminds me that I need to train arms and back. I don't want my heroes to look like me, that's weak. I want my heroes to look so good that I strive to look like them. Chris Redfield was one of my biggest inspirations when I started hitting the gym. This franchise has a history of inspiringly heroic characters. Not to mention, it is aiding in this game's success. Anyone who knows anything about marketing and sales knows to choose a demographic and target it. The existing demographic of video game players is, still to this day, a bunch of straight white dudes. Granted, I think it is far less a majority than it used to be like 10 or 12 years ago, but we are still the majority. So when a game comes out that is clearly appealing to my demographic, I am far more likely to buy it, which is a big reason why RE4 is stomping its competition. Who was this thing even for? So yeah, thank you Capcom for being a bastion of games that are actually appealing to my demo. One last thing I need to point out is the animations. I've noticed that modern games have been struggling immensely with finding a balance between smooth cinematic animations and fast responsive controls. The Callisto Protocol came under fire for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is that the realism of the animations caused actually playing the game to feel clunky and slow. That is not the case in Resident Evil 4. The animations have struck the beautiful balance between smooth and pretty while also being responsive and speedy, so as not to compromise gameplay for style. Speaking of the gameplay, if you've played an RE game released within the last 20 years, then you know roughly what to expect. And if you played either of the last 2 remakes, then you definitely know what to expect. One thing worth noting is that although Leon controls pretty similarly to his Resident Evil 2 counterpart, he moves faster this time and has more moves thanks to his Special Forces training to work for the President in conjunction with what I assume will become the BSAA. Or at least I'm fairly confident that this is where the story is going. The iconic roundhouse kicks are back, and unfortunately they look far less impressive this time around. In the original, Leon's kicks would connect with the villagers' heads because of this flexibility and power. In the remake, his kicks tend to connect roughly with the arm torso area of his opponent, which, while it still looks cool, I really prefer the original. Although his suplex is back, so I'm not complaining too much. I was really curious how they were going to handle the knife combat, and let me tell you, they did not disappoint. The creativity and balance around the combat knife and the kitchen knives and boot knives that you find adds an entire element of strategy to the gameplay that really improves over its predecessors. It's actually more rewarding to play the RE4 remake than its original in a lot of ways. The overall combat loop took everything that the original Resident Evil 4 did and does it even better. It's nearly a one-to-one remake of the original game in a lot of places, but just smoother. Just like the OG title, we've got a handful of really good locales to appreciate here: the village, the castle, and the island. The iconic village setting was a lot of people's favorite part of the original, and it's back, and even better. It's actually repugnant to look at, and I mean that in the best way possible. They took what was already a phenomenal segment in the original game and made it the actual best I think it could have possibly been. From the boat section with new additions to the big cheese boss battle, everything is literally shining with polish, dripping with style, and I am gushing. The castle is also back, and it's different. Hey, remember back when everyone played Pandemic for like 2 years and we were all shoved into our houses and doused with scarecrow fear toxin to keep us from realizing that over 60% of small businesses in the US shut down due to not being able to turn a profit, causing a giant leap towards total corpo monopolization? Well, I played through all of the original Resident Evil 4 for like the 10th time while I was stuck inside being told I couldn't go to my gym, so the game is pretty fresh on my mind, but since that was 2 years ago, it's also just long enough that the castle area had me wondering if I was misremembering how some sections went, or if the remake was gaslighting me. One thing is for sure, the castle area is where we're going to start seeing some real changes to the progression of the original. Everything from the original game is still there, I think, in the castle, but it's not in the same place. I kept getting thrown off because I'd be expecting a certain section and be whiplashed with a scene that I knew was supposed to be coming, but it was showing up somewhere not where I thought it was supposed to show up, but very close to it, so it had me doubting if I was actually even in the place that I thought I was supposed to be. This feels like such a bizarre and oddly specific sensation that I can barely even describe. Playing a game where everything is so similar and familiar, but then also out of place. I know for a fact Lewis was supposed to already be dead by this point. All that being said, and gaslighting aside, I don't think most of the changes are all that bad. In fact, most of them are probably for the better. We now meet Ada a little sooner than before, but the scene is inarguably inferior to the original.
Sorry, but following a lady's lead just isn't my style.
Leon is a canonical misogynist and you can't change my mind. There was one segment in the castle that really caught me off guard. You have this fight with El Gigante while he throws rocks at you and you dodge and weave out of the way until you get to a massive cannon and shoot the creature with it. I remember a section really similar to this in the original, but this is not how I remember it going. However, I'm pretty sure this one might even be better. Every alteration here seems to have made the game flow smoother and the narrative more cohesive and less choppy, which, let's be honest, the original game was kind of choppy in its narrative, except for a couple of really big changes. For one, and probably the most notoriously unforgivable one in the castle area, the Salazar statue is still here, but it's way smaller and does not function at all the way it did in the original. It's just sort of an environmental prop this time. And the worst part, it doesn't come alive and chase you. This is a travesty. I remember reading an interview where they brought up the statue in the original game and said how silly it was and how they couldn't really justify bringing back the part where it chases Leon across a giant stone bridge, which, while I get, is unacceptable. Even with the new dialogue, Salazar is shown to just be as, if not more dramatic than he was in the original, and just as narcissistic too. So there is actually no reason why he would not have a giant moving statue of himself chase Leon across a bridge. Lewis's changes are definitely for the best. His design does look and sound different than the original, but they really gave him more backstory, and by keeping him with Leon longer, it not only made one of the more bizarre sections of the original game a lot more interesting and fun, but it also made his character feel more endearing and meaningful than the last game. It could be said this game spoon-feeds the player the plot a bit more, while the original left it more up to nuance and discovery, like Dark Souls. But I think it's better for it. Resident Evil 4 isn't Dark Souls, although at one point it was really trying to be. Let's talk about the Salazar boss for just a second.
You talk too much.
Failed! You vulgar, utterly uncivilized, mongrel!
It was really hard at first, and it was driving me sort of insane actually, until I figured it out. This is a completely different boss than the original game. It feels more like I'm fighting a Lovecraftian eldritch abomination than a Resident Evil BOW. Not that I'm complaining, because the music is just amazing. In fact, the music in this game overall is just pretty exceptional, but the track that plays during this boss was like From Software tier awesome. Wait, hold on. I think I accidentally skipped over the first Krauser encounter because it comes before in the remake where it comes in the original. Let me talk about that really quick actually. I know this entire scenario is beyond silly, but I just do not care. The fun police cannot tread on me. I love this entire fight so much. The original was just a QuickTime event cutscene, which the remake wisely excluded all QuickTime event cutscenes, so I was curious how they were going to handle this particular sequence. At first, I thought it was going to be just a really cool mocapped cutscene, which they did give us, but no. You actually fight Krauser here using the new knife combat mechanics they implemented. This is easily my favorite new addition to the remake. The sequence is so stupid and yet so badass that it activated my primal brain in indescribable ways. There is no other game that can satiate the specific emotional need that this game quells. We're on our way to the island now. Back in 2004, when the original game dropped, this section was loathed by so many fans. And I get it. It stops feeling like a Resident Evil game and starts feeling like a Gears of War game really quickly. A game which wouldn't come out for another several years and would actually be inspired in some ways by Resident Evil 4. The original Resident Evil 4, not this one I'm talking about. You get it.
Sounds more like an alien invasion if you ask me.
Well, when I got to this section, I was just having fun with it. Ammo was scarce, but the aesthetic and the same sections that were kind of bland in the original are twice as good here, and the more action-oriented paramilitary focus is genuinely welcome after the castle section. I found myself just having a good time and appreciating the...
No, 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 no! Wait.
Fuck are you?
Wait!
I'm torn on this section. When I was approaching it in my playthrough, I was feeling the trepidation of anticipation for these creatures. PTSD-style flashbacks to the original Regenerators coursed through my mind, and the remake does a brilliant job of layering on that tense atmosphere of dread. And they're kind of pushovers. I don't know, man, maybe it's because I knew what to expect or something, but actually fighting the Regenerators this time around felt too easy. The sense of exhausted dread dissipated within 2 seconds of getting the thermal scope. Of all the changes to make, this section is the one that really needed additional areas and more build-up. Resident Evil 2 and 3 had to really set a standard for Mr. X and Nemesis as pursuers. They're such interesting and iconic enemies, and Resident Evil 4 doesn't really have a pursuer type. This section was an opportunity to really expand on that and make a bigger and more tense area of running errands and avoiding regenerators, stumbling around trying to find you. They're deadly and pretty scary for the first 5 minutes until you get the thermal scope. I refuse to diminish this game in any way for this though, since the only thing they've done here is a recreation of the original section, so they win. I'd rather that than attempt something more and make it worse, which it's very possible was tried a few times. I'm sure there were discussions about what to alter and add in the remake, and this section came up. So overall, I won't call this a gripe, just a missed opportunity that will not in any way affect my final rating of the game. After this is where I really realized they were going to cut too much content. A few things is okay, you know, like the gondola section from the village. I can understand why they cut that, although it does in one part look like they were starting to like make it happen. But I'm not sure if this little part here is actually where they were like considering and testing, or if it's just an homage to what would have been there originally. Back on the island, we have to do a wrecking ball sequence instead of the iconic truck segment, which, I mean, I understand why they did it, but I was really actually interested in seeing that bit with the truck dozer thing, and I was curious how they were going to make it work. I'm pretty sure most people hated that sequence though, so I don't know how many are actually lamenting the cut. Speaking of which, they cut an entire boss battle. And not just the boss battle, they cut a whole damn section from the game. In the original, there's a segment, I believe, right after the caverns with the flying bug hive and cart section where Leon has to run around these underground catacombs and fight off some chainsaw men before he can get back into the castle. Well, for some reason they removed this, plucked the first Krauser encounter from the island, and they put it here in the castle. And then on the island where the first Krauser encounter is supposed to happen, they completely removed the U3 boss battle in its entirety. I was so excited about getting to see how they would handle it in the remake, but I need to admit I didn't imagine they'd handle it by outright cutting it. They cut the entire underground area where you fight it for some reason. In the original, Leon has to trek through an enormous underground passage and fight this gross abomination of a creature that Sadler just literally refers to as it while making his way through these cage things. It was the most disgusting creature in the original game, and was probably the most difficult time I had in my playthrough from a couple of years ago. I ended up having to knife it to death because I had no more resources. I can remember it vividly. I cannot emphasize how disappointing the removal of this section is. I'm sort of expecting it to appear in the upcoming Separate Ways DLC, but no matter what they do, it isn't where it's supposed to be, and it should not have been cut. Don't tell me it was cut because it was too silly. The RE2 remake had a giant alligator. They could have made this work. The catacombs area being removed is also disappointing. Speaking of cut content, they cut the laser hall! Of everything to cut, this is outright unforgivable. I assume they clipped it because it leads to the U3 boss, which they were also cutting, and these cuts won't affect my rating of the game, but damn it, why? I know it was cheesy, but come on. While I'm on the topic of cheesy, the devs and the average players seem to believe that Resident Evil 4's original dialogue and voice acting was too cheesy and needed a modern touch-up. They're all wrong. The dialogue in this game is inferior in every single way imaginable to the original. Leon's voice acting, characterization, and dialogue is better in the 2004 version. I prefer the original Leon, the original Ada, the original Salazar, the original Krauser, hell, all of them except for Lewis and Ashley I prefer in the original. I like what they did with Lewis, and I prefer the new Ashley, but pretty much everybody else I like the original better. I'm going to assume they cut all of the aforementioned content to meet deadlines, so okay, fine. But the newer dialogue takes itself just a little too seriously in my opinion. We really needed a pinch more of the original writing in this game. This remake is almost a total replacement for the original. I really wanted it to be that. I wish it was. It would be awesome if Resident Evil 4 2023 could be an absolute replacement for the original game, but it's just not. Leon's recharacterization is not badass enough, but he is so close that it's frustrating. Why didn't we get Leon's "better try a new trick" line at the end? I think I've said enough, let's list this thing. Resident Evil 4 2023 is pretty much the pinnacle of modern game design. All said and done, it took me almost 19 hours to get through a standard playthrough on hardcore mode, which is more than enough to justify the $60 price tag. Not to mention the extra content and the New Game Plus mode, and even the recently released free Mercenaries DLC add-on. Resident Evil 4 Remake is an A-list game through and through, and probably the best game I've played in the past 3 to 5 years. It's tight-knit, performs exceptionally well, plays smooth as butter, packed with content, and is just an absolute blast to get through. I'm unable to emphasize enough how relieved I was to see the end of this game without once seeing some kind of modern political messaging sneak its way into the game somehow to corrupt yet another beloved title under the guise of remaking it. Modern culture has seemed to affected Leon's playboy persona, but they didn't make him a beta male as a response, just toned down his carefree attitude, which is fine by me. I think it fits for the more serious atmosphere of the remake anyway. I'm giving this game 5 out of 5 stars. It's pretty much as close to a flawless game as you can get in our modern era of gaming, and sets the standard I think other developers should be trying to achieve with their releases. All of my qualms and complaints with it are exclusively due to its inability to live up to the game it is attempting to recreate. But it comes so close and is just such a phenomenal game in its own right that I can't let those personal qualms affect my rating. I love the original RE4, and I deeply lament that some of the content from that game was not recreated in the remake, such as the laser room in the U3 boss battle. However, I also recognize that this game was not just trying to remake Resident Evil 4, it was also trying to be a proper continuation of Resident Evil 2 2019. So I think it's more important to remember that these are not the characters from the original Resident Evil 4. They're the ones from Resident Evil 2 Remake, and as such, their characterizations are going to be following up on that more than anything. If you're a fan of the original, or if you've never played an RE game before, you should still play this remake. It's as good as a modern video game can get, in my opinion, and it's stuffed full of content. If the original game was like your favorite game ever, however, you might find some disappointments here. While the village area of the game is pretty much a one-to-one recreation, save a few cut things, the castle sees some pretty major shifts and absences from the original, and the island level is missing entire chunks. I understand why they introduced Krauser earlier in the game than the island, but cutting the laser in the U3 fight is this game's greatest misstep. That's all from me. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'm a huge RE fan, so it was really a treat to make this video. If you enjoyed the watch, please leave a like to help the algorithm, and drop a comment and let me know what you think about the original game if you've played either it or the remake. Also, huge shout out to my friend Ethan for gifting me this game, and all of my patrons for helping support me make the content that I make. Subscribe if you like my take on this game, and I hope to see you in the next video.